Namaste. We'll begin our session now. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Charu Swami Niti Namine Snigdha Cheta Sopraneta Varpilam Charasapata Prabhupada Gat Pranamami Bhakti Charu. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharini Vishesha Shunavani Pashatya Deshatavini Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaur Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare. So Hare Krishna. So we are starting our reading session, and those who want to read, please raise your hands. So I will request the devotees to come turn by turn to read from where we left yesterday. Okay. Shivani Mataji. Okay. So we'll start with Shivani Mataji. 1 second. Yes, Shivani Mataji, please start from here, the second visit. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranam Guruji, all the way to Srila Prabhupada. This second visit had been even more remarkable than the first. They had treated me like a member of the family. Kerstin had even started telling me about her problems with her mother, and Marian had complained about Kerstin's not listening to her and acting so independently. I had tried to meditate, and both of them had listened to my suggestions. Subsequent visit to Brahman had deepened our relationship even further, and when Marian heard that I am leaving Germany, she begged me to come and see them before I departed. They were sad over my leaving, especially Marian and Kerstin. Marian kept trying to persuade me that I could pursue a spiritual life in Germany. I had so much appreciation for Jesus Christ. She pointed out, why did not I put that into practice? Follow him. Indeed, I had felt an appreciation for Jesus since childhood, but I had never thought of actually becoming a Christian. I saw him from an Indian perspective as someone close to God, a saint, a great saint, a prophet, but that was quite different from his portrayal in the Christian faith. Marian did not always agree with me, but she listened without protest and appreciated my understanding. The three kings who came to see Jesus at the time of his birth, I told her, were likely exalted saintly persons from India who were addressed as Maharajas, kings. They had come to see him based on astrological calculation of the movement of the stars and the planet. And then from the time Jesus was about 12 years old, people did not know where he went and what he was doing. He reappeared when he was 29. But where had he been for all those years? Where had he acquired the mystic powers by which he could turn water into wine, cure lepers, and revive the dead? He spoke about a place where he had been treated as a king and about his disappointment and frustration over the inability of his audience to understand his teaching. He allowed himself to be crucified so that their gross mentality could appreciate his compassion and mercy. And finally, they did. When Marian asked why I am not conveying my ideas to the Christian world, I replied that no one would be interested. After all, who am I? And anyway, my only consideration was search for liberation, to free myself from the bondage of birth and death. And for that, I was being called by my motherland, my glorious India. So it was with great expectation and excitement that I returned. I had been back to India once before for my sister's wedding, but this was different. I was embarking on a spiritual journey in search of my spiritual master. In search of a guru. When I landed in Delhi, I went straight to Haridwar, one of the holiest places in India, in the foothills of the Himalayas on the banks of Ganges. I had been fascinated with the place since childhood. My grandmother had gone there for Kumbh Mela, the great spiritual festival, and had turned with captivating stories about her pilgrimage. My first evening, I went down to River Ghats, where I joined thousands of pilgrims in great worship, offering lamps to Mother Ganga. I was already thrilled to be back in India. I was elated by the display of spiritual conviction. The people around me, I felt, cared less for their material prosperity than their spiritual life. And in my heart, I shared their happiness and was moved by their inner contentment. I walked through the crowd without speaking with anyone, just smiling at those around me and receiving their smiles in return. Before dawn the next morning, I went down to Ganga to take bath. It was cold and I was shivering even before I entered the water. When, when I submerged myself, however, my whole body felt rejuvenated, warm and clear and light as I could fly, and an incredible joy suffused my entire being. I don't know how long I stood there, half submerged in bliss. When I came back to myself, I sat on bank and let my thoughts float with the river's current. My mind drifted back to my childhood. I was lying by my mother's side as she told me about Mother Ganga. She did not flow from any place on the earth, my mother told me, but came from the heavenly planet Svargaloka, brought by Bhagirath, the great grandson of illustrious King Sagra. When King Sagra performed a horse sacrifice, Indra, the king of heaven, became worried that Sagra might take away his throne with the power he would gain from his sacrifice. So he stole the horse and took it to lower planetary system and tied it to a tree next to ashram of Kapila Muni, an incarnation of Supreme Lord. King Sagra had two wives, Sumati and Keshini. He had 64,000 sons from Sumati and then searched everywhere for the horse. They dug up the surface of the earth, creating a great trench that became known as Sagra, the ocean. Sagar. Eventually, they came to Kapila Muni's ashram and seeing the horse tied up to a tree, they thought that the Kapila Muni must have stolen it. With this offensive understanding, they tried to attack the sage. His meditation interrupted. Kapila Muni opened his eyes, and as a result of his glance, King Sagra's 64,000 sons were burnt into ashes. King Sagra had another son, Asamanjas, from his wife Keshini, and Asamanjas' son Anshuman also went in the search of horse and eventually came to the ashram of Kapila Muni. When Anshuman saw the horse and the pile of ashes, he understood what had happened and recognizing Kapila Muni's exalted position, offered him prayers. Pleased, Kapila Muni instructed Anshuman that his 64,000 uncle could all be delivered by water from the Ganga flowing in Svargaloka. Anshuman performed great austerities to bring Ganga down to the earth from the heavenly planets, but he could not do it. And after his death, his son Dilip tried to bring the Ganga to this material world, but he also failed. Finally, Dilip's son Bhagirath was able to bring the Ganga to the earth by practicing great austerity and penance. Mother Ganga appeared before Bhagirath and offered him a benediction. When Bhagirath told her he wanted her to come down to earth to deliver his forefathers, she said that if she were to descend from the heavens to earth, she would pierce through the earth and end up in the lower region of the universe. To prevent this, someone would have to bear the force of her fall. Bhagirath told Mother Ganga that Lord Shiva could bear such a force. Once again, he performed great austerities, and as a result, Lord Shiva agreed to bear Mother Ganga fall on his head. This, my mother told me, was how the holiest of all river, Mother Ganga, came to earth from the heavenly planets and delivered the fallen soul. This childhood.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji. Thanks. Okay, next we have Neha Jindal Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
This childhood tale now became for me a profound and glorious reality. I was grateful to be back in my holy motherland, which had been graced with so many spiritual benedictions. All I wanted was to float endlessly in the river's sublime current. When I returned to the lodge where I was staying, I heard a beautiful recitation of Sanskrit mantras reverberating from the room next door. I just sat there listening to the vibrant, melodious song. My neighbors, it turned out, were a South Indian family of 4, a husband and wife and their 2 children. Mr. Subramaniam, a government official, brought his family to holy places of pilgrimage during his vacations. He invited me to their room to talk, and the children, 2 sons aged 9 and 6, listened with great attention, respectful and well behaved. Through that family, I was able to have another glimpse of the glories of India. Although he was a high-ranking government officer, Mr. Subramaniam wanted only to visit holy places. He had little interest in material achievements, but put a premium on spiritual life and development. I was especially impressed by the way he was bringing up his children. This, I saw, was an important part of India's spiritual heritage, alive and well in contemporary family life. From Haridwar, I went upstream to Rishikesh, which was quieter, more natural, and less commercial, with many yoga ashrams and spiritual seekers from around the world. Sadhus gathered on the banks of the river, some stark naked, others just in loincloths. Most were smoking hashish, and some invited me to join them, but I declined. In the West, many of my friends had smoked hashish, and I had seen how stupid they become when they did it. With the activities of their brains subdued, the activities of their hearts became prominent, giving them a feeling of ecstasy. So when I saw the sadhus smoking, I knew not to waste my time. They were not for me. The most prominent yoga school in Rishikesh was the Shivanand Ashram. A young resident student told me that the teachings was that in order to make spiritual progress, one had to give up one's ego, one's preconceived notions, ideas, prejudices, and self-interest. They were obstacles to spiritual progress. By giving them up and practicing yoga, one could progress towards one's spiritual goal and eventually become liberated from the bondage of matter and achieve moksha, liberation. I liked what he said, but I wondered why one had to practice yoga in such a commercial atmosphere. I had always heard and read that yoga should be performed in a solitary place, away from material culture. So I did not feel inclined to join the ashram. I kept looking. One day, wandering aimlessly down a deserted road, I saw a saffron-robed figure coming from the other direction. As he approached, I saw that it was a young, handsome man with long black hair and a beard. I smiled at him as we passed, and he responded with a gentle smile of his own. We stopped and exchanged greetings, then walked for some distance together before he suggested that we sit on the riverbank and talk. He was from Punjab, he said. His father was a cloth merchant, but he had not been interested in a life of commerce. When his brothers had gone into business, he had continued his education in the college and then at a university. But he had not found fulfillment in academic life. But when he had returned home and his family had tried to get him married, he had found that he was not interested in married life either. So without telling anyone, he had left home. After traveling to various places of pilgrimage, the man had landed in Rishikesh, in the ashram of his family's guru, and had been living there ever since. When I asked about his guru's teaching, he said that their path was human welfare and meditation. Their external mission was to help others, the world suffering and poor. The internal activity was to meditate to become one with the spiritual light. When he heard that I had returned to India to pursue spiritual life, he became excited and suggested that I could stay in the ashram and practice there. I thanked him but declined his offer, explaining that I wanted to explore and see more of the spiritual life. From Rishikesh, I traveled through the Himalayas to Devprayag, Aloknand, Rudraprayag, and finally Joshimath. I wanted to continue on to Badrinath, but winter was approaching and the road had been closed. Considering Joshimath's altitude, over 6,000 feet, it was not very cold, and I liked its beautiful atmosphere, so I decided to stay. In Joshimath, I became friendly with the manager of my guest house, who would entrance me with stories of the area's saintly personalities. One day he told me about an American couple who were living high up in the mountains. They had been there meditating for at least 2 years, only rarely coming down from their retreat. I wanted to meet them, I said, but he told me that they did not meet anybody. If anyone approached, they would just chase him away. Still, I insisted, they probably would not mind meeting me, since I was a seeker too, and could benefit from their experience. They had a close connection with a doctor, the manager said. He sometimes visited the couple. Maybe he could take me with him. Dr. Lal turned out.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji. Okay, now Shashi Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Dr. Lal turned out to be a middle-aged, respectable-looking gentleman. When I asked him about the American couple, he told me that they were named Lawrence and Colette and were from California. They were serious in their practice and had found the area to be conducive to meditation. They had arranged for money to be sent to him periodically from America, and he supplied them weekly with provisions. Generally, he sent the supplies through his servant, but since I was so keen to meet them, he would take me there himself. I was thrilled to have the opportunity to enter into a remote corner of the Himalayas and meet these unusual people who had dedicated themselves so fully to their spiritual purpose that they had cut themselves from the rest of the world. So one morning we set out. Outside town, we came to a narrow path which turned into an almost invisible trail that eventually led to the ruins of a temple. Dr. Lal asked me to wait, and then he entered. Standing alone, I could see the sparkling white mountain tops stretching from one end of the horizon to the other. All around me, the hills were changing colors with the season, a festival of green, yellow, purple, and reds. Songbirds called from the trees, and water streamed down from the side of the mountain and settled in cold, shimmering pools. I cupped my palms under a small waterfall and drank. It was nectar, better than anything I had ever tasted. The place was exquisitely beautiful. I could understand why the couple had selected it for their meditation to achieve the goal of life. Freedom from the bondage of this material world, I wondered at the depth of this commitment to their spiritual quest, which had drawn them from their homes in California to this holy site of the Himalayas on the other side of the world. I was awakened from my reverie when Dr. Lal emerged with a tall, handsome man with long hair and a beard. The man smiled at me, folded his hand together, and said Namaste. He introduced himself as Chidananda, a name I thought that must have been given to him by his spiritual master. The three of us sat on a boulder facing the broad expanse of the mountains. I apologized for intruding into his sadhana, his meditative practice. I had many American friends, I told him, and like him, I had traveled through the Middle East and Europe and had spent a few years in Germany, but I had returned to India in search of a spiritual wisdom. I had not been able to really start my spiritual life. However, I was still looking for a guru. I wanted to gain insight from his pilgrimage in the mountains and his life practicing meditation in such a solitary place. Chidananda told me that he was from Southern California. In the late 60s, he had been involved in the American counterculture and had decided to come to India to explore her spiritual culture. After traveling through Goa, Banaras, and other places of pilgrimage, he had come to the Himalayas, where he had met his guru. He had lived with his girlfriend in his guru's ashram, learning the process of yoga, meditation, but when his guru tried to seduce her, they lost faith in him and left. Chidananda was not so much angry as disappointed. His guru had often spoken about the importance of celibacy in practicing yoga. He had explained how the Kundalini energy arose from the Mooladhara chakra at the base of the spine and penetrated through different chakras to the base of the spine, chakras to the sub, what it is, Sarvasra chakra. Sahasra. Okay. Sahasra chakra, the 1,000-petaled or a crown chakra at the top of the head. How that was the way one achieved samadhi, fully matured meditation. In spite of all his instructions, however, he had approached his student who treated him like father for sex. Although Chidananda had left the ashram, he still considered the man to be his guru because he had taught him so much about the science of yoga. After leaving, Chidananda had not known where to go, but one thing he had been sure of was that he wanted to stay in India and continue his spiritual practice. He had already reached the stage where he could practice on his own, so he had gone up to Badrinath and stayed there throughout the summer. In winter, he had come down to Joshimath. Then he had found this spot, the old temple in the middle of the mountains, and decided to move there and practice his sadhana. He did not keep a watch or calendar, so he did not know exactly how long he had been there, but he knew that it had been quite a while. Time was passing, but outside his awareness. Dr. Lal said, okay, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Yes, Radha Premprad Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Then he had found the spot, the old temple in the middle of the mountains, and decided to move there and practice his sadhana. He did not keep a watch or calendar, so he did not know exactly how long he had been there, but he knew that it had been quite a while. Time was passing, but outside his awareness. Dr. Lal said that he had known Chidanand for more than 2 years, but that Chidanand had been living at the temple ruins before they met. At first, Chidanand would occasionally go down to the market to get provisions, but Dr. Lal had recently been taking care of the couple's supplies. They subsisted on only fruits and vegetables, no grains or beans or even nuts. When I asked Chidanand about his spiritual progress, he said that the process of asana, sitting in yoga positions, was effective at the initial stage, but then did not make any difference. Pranayam, however, control of the breath, was very effective. Practicing Kumbhaka, the stoppage of breathing, helped him control his mind and become fixed in meditation. When his guru's training, he could now hold his breath easily for a few minutes and was getting better. When I asked him if he would teach me, he just smiled and said that he was still a student, not yet in a position to instruct. As Dr. Lal and I climbed back down to Joshimath, he told me that was probably the most Chidanand had spoken to anyone other than his girlfriend in months. My encounter with Chidanand was one of the most memorable experiences I had in my time in the Himalayas. But I had not yet found my guru and I was still searching. Next, I descended to the Gangetic Plains. I stayed at many ashrams and monasteries and associated with many spiritual practitioners, and all of my experiences were unique and educational, but one stood out in its depth. I had known about the female saint Anandamayi Ma from my childhood. One of my aunts was her disciple, and she had told us many fascinating stories about her. So when I came across one of her ashrams on the banks of the Ganga, I decided to stop for a visit. The atmosphere of the ashram was serene and the residents were friendly. The ashram head, Swarupananda Swami, took a liking to me and treated me with warmth and great care, and we spent a lot of time together. Seeing my sincere search for a guru and inclination towards spiritual life, he considered me a ripe candidate for discipleship and decided to take me to Anandamayi Ma, who was in Banaras. The Banaras ashram was packed with Anandamayi Ma's followers and admirers, but she treated me with special kindness and affection and spent considerable time answering my questions and offering advice. Every evening she would have a public darshan which hundreds of people would attend. Most of the time she simply sat there in silence and people were happy just to see her. Senior disciples would speak about her glories and discourse on various spiritual topics. Sometimes there would be kirtan, congregational chanting, and during the kirtan, Anand Mahima would sometimes fall into a trance. Since she would often sit there with her eyes closed, I could not always tell when she was in a trance, but her assembled disciples would make a sound in unison, a kind of howling that sounded strange in such a solemn atmosphere. At first, I didn't understand its meaning, but then I found out that it signals that her trance had begun. I felt a deep respect for Anandamayi Ma and considered her to be an exalted spiritual personality, but most of her answers seemed more like riddles, and I did not know what to make of them. One day I asked, "What is the meaning of sadhana?" Sadhana is svadhana, she replied, one's own wealth. When I asked, then what about Shuddhi, the ultimate achievement of sadhana? She said, Siddhi will be achieved according to one's own spiritual accomplishment. I did not say anything, but in the back of my mind, I began to wonder, wasn't the Guru supposed to lead the disciple through proper practice of sadhana in order to achieve spiritual perfection? I also had many discussions with Swarupananda Swami. I knew he was keen for me to join the ashrama and become a disciple of Anandamayi Ma, but I asked, what would I gain spiritually by doing that? He had spent many years as one of her most prominent disciples. What had he gained? Swarupananda became thoughtful and told me that he had found a purpose in life and that he was internally content in that position. I asked whether that inner contentment was everything or if one should strive for spiritual perfection and become free from the material world and go somewhere beyond it and experience an endless bliss. Yes, he answered, and that will happen by the mercy of the Mother. I like the ashram. I like Swarupanand Swami, and on top of everything, I had developed a deep appreciation of Anandamayi Ma. Finally, I decided to join. So one evening, Swarupananda took me to see Anandamayi Ma in her room. When he raised the topic of my joining the ashram, however, she looked at me, smiled affectionately, and declared, "He is not meant for this ashram. He belongs somewhere else. And when he surrenders, the whole world will come under his feet." Her statement hit me like a bolt from the blue. I was amazed and somewhat embarrassed by her prophecy, but I was also devastated by her rejection. I wanted to beg her to let me join and eventually become her disciple, but my pride would not allow it. Swarupanand sympathized with me and told me afterwards that although Ma had spoken like that, I could continue to stay in the ashram. But almost as soon as she had spoken, I had decided to move on. She was not my guru, I realized. I had to continue my search. The next afternoon, Swarupanand accompanied me to Anandmayi's room to tell her that I was leaving. She was meeting with a few close disciples from different parts of India and was handing them prasad, sanctified food, with her left hand, which seemed strange, since in India the left hand is never used to handle prasad or for any spiritual activity or exchange. When she saw me, she stopped, smiled beautifully, and blessed me that my spiritual quest would be rewarded with a wonderful result. Then, with her right hand, she handed me an apple. Then she turned back to her guests and resumed distributing prasad. I left the ashram despondent. Swarupanand drove me to the railway station on the way to Calcutta, and before we parted, he told me, "You are very fortunate. You have received the special mercy of Ma." It sounded like he was just trying to console me, because it was quite obvious to me that she did not want to accept me. It was not that I really wanted to join her ashram, but I was hurt by her rejection. "Why do you say that?" I asked. "Generally, she gives her prasad with her left hand," he replied, "but to you she gave it with her right hand." "Yes, I noticed that," I said. "What does it mean?" "When she just gives her blessings, she gives it with her left hand. But when she gives her special mercy, she gives it with her right." "Does it have anything to do with karma?" "Yes, you can say that," he said. "When she gives it with her right hand, she actually offers her good karma. And she does have a lot of it," I said with a smile. "Yes," he agreed. "There is no doubt about that. But when too many people touch her feet, she becomes sick. Therefore, we do not allow anyone to do so." "Why does she become sick?" "Because when people touch your feet, they give you their sinful reactions and take away your good karma." Even with Swarupanand Swami's supportive comments, however, Anandamayi Ma's rejection had disappointed me, and by the time I arrived in Calcutta, I had decided to suspend my search. Rather, I thought I would wait for my guru to come to me. I was feeling some anger mixed with pride. I had been searching for my guru but could not find him. Did I really have one? If I did, I considered I would let him come and find me. I was not going to search for him anymore. Shortly thereafter, I received
Hare
a
Krishna.
letter.
Thank you, Mother.
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Thank you, Mother. Okay. Next we have Ronnie Prabhu. And those who have not read, if they would like to read, then please raise your hands. Go ahead, Ronnie Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Shortly thereafter, I received a letter from Mark saying that he was coming to Calcutta to meet me. When he arrived, I was happy to see him and brought him to my father's home, where I was staying. He had changed quite a bit, though, not only in his appearance but also in his attitude. Previously, he had been so averse to smoking that when we were hitchhiking, he would sometimes ask the driver to put out his cigarette. I would tell him that he should be grateful for their kindness and not be so demanding, but he had argued that he would rather be asked to leave the car than be surrounded by cigarette smoke. Now, I discovered he had not only started to smoke cigarettes, but was also smoking hashish. One day, when Mark and I were sitting on a lakeside bench, he told me that he had come back to India to get a supply of hashish and marijuana. He was working with a group in the UK, but he needed a steady supply from India and Nepal. He proposed that I become his partner, taking care of his supply. I was shocked and hoped that he was joking. But when I saw he was not, I refused. I was relieved when he simply accepted my response and we agreed to go trekking together in Nepal. I tried to make it a condition that he would not indulge in hashish or marijuana during the trip, but finally we agreed that he could, but only in the evenings after the trek. Soon after we arrived in Pokhara, however, I realized that Mark wanted to go to the Himalayas not just for trekking, but also to find suppliers for his drugs. Still, we trekked for 10 days or so all the way to Annapurna base camp. When we returned to Calcutta, I introduced Mark to some of my friends, but when I found out that he was trying to talk them into serving as his suppliers, I told him that we would have to part ways. I was sad, but this was not the same earnest and innocent Mark with whom I had traveled 6 years before. The Nectar of Devotion, July 1976 to January 1977. This period in Calcutta was among the most difficult of my life. I could neither adjust to the world around me nor step into spiritual life for which I yearned. I knew that follow to follow the spiritual path, I needed a guru, someone who would take me by the hand and lead me onto the spiritual path, to a world of knowledge, emancipation, and joy. But I had not been able to find him now, and now I was waiting. The incident with the Nandamayi Ma had given me hope. If I had a guru, I felt he would reveal himself to me. One evening, I received a visit from my old friend Prasoon. I was happy to see him, but he looked different. The Prasoon I remembered had long hair and dressed in Western clothes, but now his head was shaven and he wore a dhoti and kurta. I knew that in Germany he had become a devotee of Krishna in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON. So his change of appearance didn't shock me, but the glow from his face was striking. His whole demeanor radiated peace and tranquility. When I had first heard that Prasoon and his German girlfriend Cornelia had joined ISKCON, I had not taken it seriously, since he and I had not had a very pleasant experience when we had visited the ISKCON temple in Hamburg. As I had been coming out of the university canteen one day, I had seen a group of young Westerners, the women dressed in saris and the men in dhotis and kurtas, chanting and dancing. The sight had delighted me, but it had also made me long for home. I was far from Calcutta, and these young men and women dressed in traditional Indian attire had filled me with pride for my culture. One of them was giving out magazines, and I walked up to him and bought one, and we talked. He told me about their mission and invited me to their temple, just a subway stop from the university. I had visited and befriended some of them, but when I had shared my experience with Prasoon, he and I, and when I had visited and I shared my experience with Prasoon, he and I visited the temple together a few times. Once we were talking to one of the American devotees there, and because we were doing most of the talking, another devotee, who may not have liked that we were talking more than listening, started to criticize us, saying that Buddha was a swindler and Ramakrishna, a popular spiritual personage from Bengal, was a cheat. Prasoon had looked at me with surprise. Neither he nor I had mentioned Buddha or Ramakrishna, and I had suddenly indicated that we should leave, which we did, and we had never returned. Since then, whenever I had seen the devotees, I had avoided them. If I saw them on one side of the road, I would move to the other, And when I had returned to Calcutta, even though the ISKCON temple was not far from my home and I had passed it many times, I had never entered. So when I heard that Prasoon had joined, I did not think he was serious. Seeing how he looked when he came to see me, however, how effulgent he was, I had to revise my impression. Are you really serious about your involvement? I asked. He answered with a gentle smile, yes. He told me how he had joined ISKCON in Berlin after reading a book, Sri Ishopanishad, by its founder Acharya A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. He had been initiated and received the spiritual name Sarva Bhavana Das Adhikari. Now he had returned to help the Krishna consciousness movement in India and was serving as vice president of the temple in New Delhi. He invited me to go to Delhi, but I remained non-committal. He did not try to persuade me or preach to me. We just spoke and enjoyed each other's association. I was impressed with the life Sarva Bhavana was leading, abstaining from meat eating, intoxication, sex, and gambling. But what impressed me most was his love and respect for his guru, whom he called Srila Prabhupada. When Sarva Bhavana spoke about him, his eyes lit up and his face radiated joy. I thought his attachment might be merely sentimental, but I was impressed nonetheless. The next morning, Sarva Bhavana and I got together again, but when I offered to take him to lunch, he declined. I assured him that the food would be vegetarian, but he said he would go home and eat there. When I insisted, he told me that although the food would be vegetarian, the kitchen and utensils would have been used to cook other preparations. Again, I was impressed with his standards and conviction. I had many friends who were strict vegetarian, but Sarva Bhavana standards were on another level.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. Yes, Rachna Mataji, please go.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Danvat Pranam.
Hare Krishna. Dhanwad.
That afternoon, I accompanied him to the nearby ISKCON temple where he introduced me to a group of young American devotees. He had a wonderful discussion about various aspects of spiritual life, and I was especially impressed by two of the devotees, Kundali Dasa and Aneet Desya Vapu Dasa. Both struck me as extremely intelligent, but whereas Kundali, short and plump, was full of humor, Aneet Dyasa, tall, slim, and saintly looking, was quite sober. I was attracted to his gentle and compassionate nature, and we immediately became friends. He told me about chanting the holy name in the form of Maha Mantra and said that the benefits of eating Krishna Prasad, food that had been offered to Krishna, was far greater than those gained by performing thousands of sacrifices. I marveled at Aneet Dyasa's knowledge of Vedic scriptures and was beginning to appreciate the wisdom he related. When he asked me if I would like to render some service, I immediately agreed, and he took me to a room next to the altar, where he showed me how to cut food that would be offered to the deities. He told me about the benefits of rendering devotional service, the ultimate engagement for a living entity with rewards that could not be measured by material calculation. We cut up quite a bit of fruit, and after a few plates were offered to the Lord on the altar for some minutes and then returned, we mixed that fruit with the rest, brought it to all out to the balcony where devotees were sitting in a row and served them. Aneet Dyasa then made a plate for me and another for himself, and we sat together and ate while he described how Krishna consciousness movement would solve the world's problems by delivering the suffering conditioned souls back home to serve the Lord. I was touched by Aneet Dyasa's words and by him engaging me in this way. The inner sanctum was a sacred place, and he had brought me, a total stranger, into this sacred place to render personal service to the Lord. I savored his every word. Over the next few days, I returned to the temple regularly. One evening, after attending the Sandhya Aarti, the evening worship service, and a class on the Bhagavad Gita, I wanted to buy a copy of the book. They did not have one on hand, but when I said I would appreciate any book they had, a devotee gave me a free copy of The Nectar of the Devotion, Srila Prabhupada's English summary, study of a Sanskrit work by Srila Rupa Goswami, a 16th century saint, poet, and scholar. The minute I got home, I opened the book and began to read. I felt as if another reality was unfolding before my eyes. Right from the beginning of the book, Srila Prabhupada stated that God was a person, the Supreme Person, Krishna. I had maintained a deep attachment to Krishna since childhood, but I never had a clear understanding that he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Throughout my spiritual quest, I had been under the impression that liberation was the ultimate goal of life. But Srila Prabhupada was very clearly explained that one who engages in devotional service to Krishna achieves liberation automatically. I had never read anything like that. This was what I had been looking for all my life. When I was younger, I had influenced by Ayn Rand's philosophy. Objectivism portrayed in that novel, Atlas Shrugged, which depicted that I had thought was an ideal society. But the Nectar of Devotion, I know, understood, presented the ultimate perfection of an actual ideal society. Within its pages, I found a society based truly on the highest ideal of life, selfless service to the Supreme Lord. I read until I fell asleep, and when I woke up in the next morning, the first thing I did was pick up the book and start reading again. Srila Prabhupada explained that there are 5 kinds of liberation: becoming one with the Lord, living with the Lord on the same planet, having the same features as the Lord, enjoying the same opulences as the Lord, and living as the Lord's companion. But such liberation, Prabhupada pointed out, held no attraction for a devotee engaged in the service of the Lord. Devotional service yielded a far greater joy. Everything was becoming clearer, and the more I read, the more I absorbed I became. I lamented having wasted so many years searching without even knowing what I was searching for. Srila Prabhupada was answering all my questions perfectly. He explained the cause of our suffering and showed the way out. I could not put the book down. I read all day, and that night I dreamed of Srila Prabhupada. He was sitting in a throne-like seat on a throne-like
Hare Krishna. We can't hear you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Yes, Prabhu, we also can't hear.
Got disconnected. Okay. So next we have Parul Patel Mataji. You can start, Mataji, from here.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
I could not put the book down. I read all day, and that night I dreamed of Srila Prabhupada. He was sitting on a throne-like seat, and a brilliant light emanated from his body. There was a crowd of people sitting at his feet. I did not ask him anything. I simply offered my obeisances and said, I surrender myself completely at your lotus feet. Please accept me and guide me. When I woke, my heart brimmed with a wonderful feeling of fulfillment. I had found my spiritual master. As I continued reading, I learned more and more about Krishna and his greatness. He was a supreme creator, proprietor, and controller, and I realized that the goal of my life was to surrender to him. I felt in my heart that I would no longer have to worry about anything. Krishna would take care of me in all respects. I was almost overwhelmed with relief, free from any anxiety or distress. Convinced that I had found my guru, I could not wait to return to the temple. The next day, I went and asked Kundali Dasa if he knew where Srila Prabhupada was. After inquiring from other devotees, he told me that Srila Prabhupada was in America and would not be back in India for a few months, probably not until October. He generally stayed in America during the summer and returned to India in the autumn. Looking forward to Srila Prabhupada's return, I decided to travel in the meantime to Bengal and visit the places where Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Krishna in the mode of Radharani, his eternal consort, had some 500 years earlier taken birth and engaged in his transcendental activities. I felt fortunate that I had been born so close by. First, I went to Mayapur, the place of Lord Chaitanya's appearance, just 130 kilometers from Kolkata. The evening I arrived, an arati was going on in the temple, and the large hall shook with the resounding beats of mridanga drums. The room was full of devotees, nearly all Westerners, dancing, each in his or her own style, but all in rhythm with the kirtan. The scene was ecstatic. Everyone, even drenched in perspiration, appeared divine. After the arati, several devotees came over to speak with me. All very friendly, they arranged for my accommodation at the guest house and invited me to attend a Bhagavad Gita class that was just about to begin. The class was in a large conference room upstairs, led by a devotee named Raghava Pandita Das. The atmosphere was inspiring. All the bright young devotees listening with rapt attention, I felt like I was getting a glimpse of the spiritual world. Raghava Pandit seemed quite learned, and he spoke beautifully, explaining the importance of spiritual life, of understanding the futility of our materialistic endeavors, and the rewards of becoming absorbed in spiritual activities. By surrendering to Krishna and engaging in his service, he said, we experience the real joy for which we were always hankering. And Srila Prabhupada had created a perfect arrangement for all of us to achieve the ultimate perfection in the serene atmosphere of Mayapur and in the association of the Lord's devotees. I felt that Raghav Pandit was speaking directly to me. It was also appropriate to my situation, and I was impressed what a Westerner had so much knowledge about the Vedas and was quoting Sanskrit verses from the Bhagavad Gita as if he knew the entire scripture by heart.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
We have one more hand, so we give the chance. Thank you, Mataji. Yes, Vicky, you can start.
Hare Krishna. After class, we all sat conversing. Not many people visited Mayapur in those days, and the devotees were curious about what had brought me there. They were very encouraging and requested that I stay and become a devotee, or at least give it a try. One of the brahmacharis, the single young male devotees, brought in a large plate of sweets and other delicacies and served all the devotees as they sat on the floor, eating off leaf plates. The food was Mahaprasad. I was told prasad that had come directly from the deities. I had never tasted anything so delicious. Even though the physical facilities in Mayapur were quite basic, I felt very much at home. I arose early the next morning, well before sunrise, and attended Mangal Aarti. Afterwards, I sat with the devotees and chanted japa for the first time. I had been familiar with the Hare Krishna Mahamantra since childhood. I had heard it sung and had joined many kirtans, and Anirdeshya Vapu had explained its spiritual significance to me in Calcutta. But I had never chanted quietly, counting my rounds on beads. At 7, we all participated in Shringar Aarti, greeting the deities. Then we worshipped Srila Prabhupada in Guru Puja and afterwards we gathered in the upstairs room for class. I was told that a sannyasi, a senior male renounced devotee, was going to speak on Srimad Bhagavatam, the most important Vaishnava scriptures. Can you please move the screen up? Vaishnava's scripture which Srila Prabhupada had translated and on which he had written extensive commentary. In the room, a handsome young American on an elevated seat sang Jaya Radha Madhav. I had never heard the prayer, but I had learned that the temple deities were named Sri Sri Radha Madhav, and now I saw that there was a link between Srimad Bhagavatam and the deities. It sounded amazing, sublime. The young sannyasi, like the devotee giving class, the previous evening was clearly knowledgeable, and he recited Sanskrit shlokas fluently and with authority. It was the first time I had experienced Westerners having such command of the Vedic scriptures. I was both awestruck and painfully aware of my own inadequacy in the subject, and I was also beginning to comprehend Srila Prabhupada's profound influence on his disciples. After class, the sannyasi greeted me with a smile and introduced himself as Satadhanya Swami. He had already heard about me, he said, and he expressed his pleasure in meeting me and joined the others in requesting that I remain with the devotees and become one myself. All the warm invitations, along with the wonderful spiritual atmosphere, attracted me greatly. Since I had already made up my mind to surrender to Srila Prabhupada, I thought, why not commit myself and stay? It was not difficult. I just went to a barber and had my head shaved, purchased a dhoti and kurta set, took a bath in Ganga, threw away my old clothes, and put on the new ones. When I returned to the temple, everyone was surprised and delighted at my transformation. The first to see me was Pandu Das, a talented painter from America whom I had befriended the previous evening. Hey, he exclaimed, you shaved up and became a devotee. But then he added, no, you have always been a devotee. The Mayapur temple and community were managed by two co-directors, Jayapataka Swami and Bhavananda Goswami, both from America. Jayapataka Swami was quite young, Bhavananda somewhat older. I was introduced to them in an office where they sat side by side on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by devotees. After a brief initial exchange, they gave me a form to fill out, asking my name, address, and other details. One point on the form especially impressed me, that I should never act in such a way that would bring dishonor or disgrace to Srila Prabhupada. That became deeply ingrained in my heart. Next.
Hare Krishna, yes, we have time. Thank you. So Hare Krishna. So thank you, dear devotees. And I hope all of us are praying for Guru Maharaj. And, thank you so much for joining us in this sessions. So we'll end the session now. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deva Gauravani Pracharini Vishesha Shunavadi Ashyati Deshatari Jagat Guru Shri Prabhupada.
Sorry, Prabhuji. The internet was a problem, so there was a cut in between, so that's why.
No problem, Alice. Rather, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.